Hi, my name is Mike Abramson, and today I'm going to walk you through how to set up and play a round of 10,000 Goblins. 10,000 Goblins is a game where you are a bunch of fledgling adventurers that want to join the Adventurers Guild, but there's only one spot left. There's also an endless number of goblins up in the hills, and they've told you, hey, tell you what, go deal with some of these goblins and bring back proof that you could defeat one of their leaders, and we'll let you into the guild. Whoever comes back first, or whoever comes back with the most treasure and goblin ears, will be the one who gets to join the guild. So it's a competition to get to join the prestigious Adventurers Guild. To set this up, all I'm going to do is grab 5 of these different goblin types that I've got over on the side to create my goblin dungeon. That way, each time you play, you've got a different set of goblins that you could end up playing against, whether you want to randomize it or pick it, or even just do 3 of each goblin type. Each goblin type has 6 of them in it, so I'm going to pick here the Armored Goblin, the Goblin Grunt, the Spear Goblin, the Goblin Knight, and the Screaming Goblin. I'm going to shuffle these up, and then I'm going to set that on the table, and that is going to become our first dungeon. So with the first dungeon, you have a starting character that has 2 weapon dice and no spell dice. Spell dice are how you really customize your character as you progress. They're also, as you purchase spell dice, how you increase your health and survivability. So I've got my deck here, somewhat shuffled. I'm going to put that on the table. I've got a store over here. Whenever I rest, I can choose to buy an item. I've got my item deck over here, and I've got my turn order cards. If I was playing a real game with multiple people, we would pick the turn order cards that represent those players. In this case, I've got the lightning sword and the emerald. We would shuffle those up and then pick one of those to figure out who goes first. In this case, it wouldn't be me, but for the purposes of the demo, we'll just go ahead and do this. Part of the reason we do randomized turn order is so that you can't just predict or base all of your information off of the person to your right. We don't want you to constantly be able to go, okay, well, I see what they did, I see what they did, I see what they did, I'm going to do this. It really adds a little bit of chaos to your decision making, especially if you go last one turn and first the next. On my turn, I've entered the dungeon. I'm ready to go here. Until I say I'm going to rest, I'm considered in the dungeon. On my turn, I have these 2 weapon dice here. They have 2 zeros, 2 1s, and 2 2s on them, and one of those 2s has a little critical symbol on it, which will matter more when we actually pick up spells. And I'm going to choose a number of goblins that I want to fight. So in this case, I'm going to play it somewhat conservatively here at the beginning. I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to fight 2 goblins. So I'm going to flip the top goblin here, which is an armored goblin. I'm going to flip the next one, which is also an armored goblin. Well, it's a good thing I went conservative in this case, because it takes 2 damage to defeat one of these, and they do 1 damage each. Now, the way you assign dice is pretty simple. You roll your dice. I've got a 2 and a 0 here. I can assign each of these dice to 1 goblin, or each of these dice to a goblin. I could assign them all to the same goblin. That's perfectly fine. What I can't do is split that damage between 2 goblins, and in this case I wouldn't anyway. So I defeated this armor goblin with that 2 damage, so he gets defeated. I collect a goblin ear token. This guy's still here though, so he's going to do 1 damage to me, so I'm going to mark that down here. Now I'm still in combat, so I go ahead and roll again. Oh goodness, I rolled 2 zeros. That's not a good start. That gives me another damage here. Let's roll again. There we go. I have 2 1s. I'm going to assign both of those 1s to my armored goblin here. He is defeated. I get another goblin ear token. And the game would progress to the next player. On my next turn, I do the same thing again. I say, how many goblins do I want to fight? I'm going to be a little bit reckless here. I'm going to say, you know what? I think I could take 3 of these guys. So I flipped over a goblin grunt. Oh, a screaming goblin. And another goblin grunt. Goblin grunts aren't too bad. Goblin grunts say they do 1 damage and they have 1 defense. And if the goblin lieutenant was in play, I'd draw an additional goblin when they came into play. Screaming goblins are a problem though. Screaming goblins, when they come into play, they draw a goblin, and whenever they attack, they also draw a goblin. So they're weak, but they have a pretty powerful ability. So because I drew a screaming goblin, I now have to draw an additional goblin. So I'm going to flip him over, which is another goblin grunt. So this fight is still manageable as long as the dice roll in my favor here. There we go. I've got a 2 I'm going to assign to that Screaming Goblin just to go ahead and get him out of the way. 1 to this Goblin Grunt. Those two are defeated. I gain 2 ear tokens. These 2 grunts remain, so I take 2 damage. Oh, that's a problem. I'm now down to 2 health. I now have a choice. I could try to roll again and see if I can take these guys out before I get killed or defeated. Or I could go ahead and flee, but if I flee, I'm going to lose half of my tokens that I've gathered so far, rounded in my favor. If you look at one of the player progression cards here, and I'll pull another one up for you to see here, there are numbers in that blue section that tell you how many goblins you have to have defeated in order to advance to that level. So if I have 3 goblin ears when I rest, I can buy 1 more spell die. If I have 6, I could buy 2. If I spend 3 to buy 1, if I rest and I just buy this first die, because I didn't have 6 tokens, in order to get this next one, I still need to spend 6 tokens for a total of 9. So it really behooves me to try and push right here to get all 6 of those tokens to buy 2 dice at once, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and roll and see if I can get these guys out. All right, and I can. I got a 2 and a 2. Those guys are defeated. I'm going to put those away. I'm going to get 2 goblin ears here. And I would end my turn. Now my next turn, I'm definitely going to rest. I'm at 2 health over here. I have 6 ears, which means I'm going to gain 2 dice. I'm in a really good spot. So let's say it's my next turn. I say I'm going to rest. So I have to spend all of my collected ears whenever I rest. If I wanted to, if I'd had more, I could say I'm going to buy dice and I'm going to buy items out of this store over here. And the store has values at the bottom that tell you how much they cost from 1 to 6 ears to buy them. The ones that are out right now are 1 to 3. But I'm going to spend those ears. I'm going to level myself up twice because I'm resting. I go back up to full health, which is now higher because I've bought 2 additional dice. And I get to pick any 2 dice that are in the store or that are left for me to add to my character. What's also interesting is there are a couple of ways I can add those dice to my character. I like to play defensively, so I'm going to grab one of these armor dice. These armor dice have 2 4s, 2 5s, and 2 6s on them. So if I put them in my spell book, I can add them to my roll on any given attack. I'd roll it, and then I would gain that much armor, in this case 5, which I would lose instead of health, unless a goblin says otherwise. But that spell is expended. I've spent it, I've cast it, I can't do it again, unless I get a mana potion like this that I could then use to gain the spell back. Alternatively, I can set it as an enchantment. If I enchant my weapon dice on 0, then whenever I roll my weapon dice, if I were to get a 0, I can spend that 0 to instead do the 0 effect on armor. In this case, I would gain 1 armor for that 0 that I just spent. Now, once you've expended an enchantment, you can't do it again that roll. You have to wait to your next roll. So if I'd rolled 2 zeros, I'd only get the 1 armor off of the 1 die. But if I had 2 armor die sitting over here, I'd have the option to do the other. I can also enchant this in the 2-star spot. This says if I roll the 2 critical, this little guy here, which there's only 1 of on each weapon die, I can do the 2 critical effect instead. And in that case, it's gain 3 armor. So every time I would crit, I would be able to do 2 damage with this die and do the critical effect, which would give me 3 additional armor, which is pretty powerful. In this case, though, I want to set this on 0s because I want my 0s to do something better. And I'm going to go ahead and grab a fireball and put that in my spell book. Now, again, I can configure this however I want, whatever makes the most sense for me and the way that I want to play the game. And anytime I rest, I can swap those around. So if I decide, you know what, I really need this fireball over on my crit instead, or I got a new spell and I want to swap this out and put my armor over in my spell book instead, I can do those things. You can also do that in the middle of the dungeon if you end up getting a polymorph potion that allows you to move things around a little bit. So the game would continue at this point. I would be able to go back into the dungeon. I might say, you know what, I've got a fireball on me. I'm going to take 4 of these guys on. So I flip over 1, 2, 3, 4 goblins. You'll see these goblin knights here have treasures on them. So if I defeat them, I also gain a treasure. But they have 2 attack and 2 defense power, which is a little bit harder for me to deal with. However, I've got the fireball. I'm not feeling too bad about this. I'm going to go ahead and say, you know what, I'm going to add my fireball and my armor die to this roll. I'm going to roll. Here we go. My fireball spell here has a couple of different effects on it. Most notably here is that 2 goblins take damage equal to your roll. is what's about to happen with that spell. Now, if I put it in 0, I could have said 2 goblins deal 1 less damage. Zeros are typically defensive. And if I put it in my critical, I could have dealt an additional 1 damage to 2 other goblins. So in this case, I'm going to pick 2 goblins to take 3 damage. I think it's pretty obvious which 2 are going to take that right there. I'm going to gain 6 armor because I rolled my armor die here. That's expended. And I got a 2 and a 1. I'm going to put those on each of those, and I've managed to fight this whole encounter and win. I'd gain 4 ears from that encounter. 3, 4. That die is expended. These come back to me. These guys get discarded. But since the 2 knights had treasures on them, I also get to draw 2 treasures off the top of the deck. And in this case, I have a smoke bomb and a magic dart that I can use on future turns. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there as far as talking about how the game is played and walking through actual turn order. Once I have 10 of these goblin ears collected, I'd be able to challenge the goblin lieutenant. I would simply say I'm challenging the lieutenant. I would spin those ears. I would have to do that at the beginning of my turn. And then I would draw the goblin lieutenant and do whatever he says. So in his case right now, he says he's a 3/4. He has 2 treasures on him, and when I draw him, I have to draw 2 additional goblins, which can be particularly tricky when you have goblin grunts and screaming goblins in the deck, which can draw more goblins when he's in play. Once the goblin lieutenant is defeated, if I defeated him, anybody else who had a turn left, if they had 10 tokens or could trade in items to get a total of 10 tokens, is allowed to challenge the goblin lieutenant as well. And then at the end of that round, whoever has defeated the lieutenant is in the running for the win. Whoever has the most goblin ear tokens after selling items is the one who actually comes out and wins. Now that's saying you're doing a single dungeon run. There's a whole second dungeon sitting over there that I'm not getting out and talking about too much. But suffice to say, the way this track works is it goes up through the blue dungeon, which gives you a maximum number of 3 spell dice. And when you beat the boss, you get an additional weapon die. If you were to continue into the green dungeon, you would have 3 weapon dice and 3 spell dice to start with. And the dungeon is significantly harder. You'd also have 10 health to work with. Once you start the next dungeon, the progression is the same. You can defeat 3 enemies in the green dungeon, or 6 or 10, in order to get 1, 2, or 3 spell dice. And that's the game. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk about it more. If anything didn't make sense in what I was talking about with the setup, I'm happy to go into more detail on that. And thank you so much for watching.